So,
yeah, good stuff.
Yeah, well, John O'Brake here with Mark Phillips, USA, France, Australia. This is like a multi-continent expedition, as only we do well at Business in Bearfleet and in the Sandtrax community. So welcome, Mark. Good to see you again, mate. Looks like it's a beautiful day there in the French Alps.
Well, stunning summer this year.
Yeah, it's shaping up to be a nice day here in Western North Carolina. And we're with Darren Foster today. Darren, how you doing, mate?
Really well, guys.
And
I've got to say, here in the Whitsundays, it's been an excellent day. We've had excellent weather.
Yeah, so just for the record, Darren's in the Whitsundays, which is one of the most beautiful parts of Australia, both climate and geography and all that sort of thing. So we're not massively jealous, just a little. And across America, I think
Boaties, paradise, islands everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. For our less educated people on continents we're on, that's like, the Caribbean or, Cozumel or, Belize, somewhere like that, so it sucks to live there, right, Darren? So
it's terrible. That's terrible. We live in the heart of the Great Barrier Reef. I mean, it's just a shocking place to have to live.
Yeah. So welcome, Darren. So good to have you here. It's Thursday night there in Australia. Mark, do you want to do a quick introduction and then we'll get into it?
Great, thanks so much, Darren. Yeah, you and I have connected a number of times in person and remotely over the years. We've done a business at Bearfleet, done some projects there in Airlie Beach. We've sat there and joined some of your entrepreneurial activities. Absolutely fantastic to see such a strong ecosystem supporter of startups and new founders and international business. And somebody that maintains a wonderful sense of humour during some of the most dire crises of cyclones and COVID and everything else that's been thrown at you in the last couple of years. But I must admit, probably the standout opportunity, I guess, that you have that most other people don't have is you go diving on the Great Barrier Reef like every day or every week. So welcome and please start with telling us a little bit about your history and about how you came to be working away there in Airlie Beach.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, we have had a bit of history together over the last few years. I remember sitting in a room with you and the first time I got introduced to you and being extremely jealous as you told me about how many BMW motorcycles you had on different continents. I think that was the thing that made me connect with you, was the fact that you own these motorcycles in different parts of the world. Yeah, you're right. I live here in Airlie Beach in the Whitsundays, so we're in the middle of the Great Barrier Reef. We've got about 4,000 kilometres of Great Barrier Reef to the north of us and about 2,000 kilometres to the south of us. And right at the moment, we've got whales and all sorts of things running around the place. And for the last 7 years, I've been developing robotics, which when I sort of sit back and think, how did I get here? I sometimes wonder why I ever did it, but in the end, that's where we've ended up. And as you said, I get the opportunity to go diving every day on the Great Barrier Reef, and believe it or not, that's actually what I gave up to be able to do robotics.
And you've been diving a long time. It goes to show.
Yes, I've been diving for 30 years. Well, actually, well over 30 years, and I've dove all over the world. Even in the really cold parts up of the USA and the western, right up in the western areas of the USA and the Caribbean, and I learnt to dive in Papua New Guinea. So it's been a great passion of mine right through my life.
I was lucky to get my dive certificate nearby in the Solomon Islands. A beautiful place.
Solomons are beautiful.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Great place.
So you've run a diving.
I gave.
Has been diving.
That's correct. I've owned several different businesses that were diving orientated. So it was around recreational diving to begin with, and then I got a bit of a reputation as a guy who could do stuff underwater that other people couldn't do underwater, and so I started being asked to
That
go
could be a
and
bit ominous for a Queenslander, mate. So
it can be.
PG,
It can be.
PG rated. PG rated.
yeah, that's right.
And I started being asked to go and look at people's boats who, they'd bashed them into the coral, or they'd done something else to it, and eventually ended up in a situation where I was actually earning more money after work, in the 2 hours after work. I was earning twice as much money in the 2 hours after work than I was earning for a whole day's pay. I decided, well, you can't keep going to work for half the amount of money you can make in 2 hours. And if I can make that amount of money in 2 hours, then I need to probably start concentrating on that. And that turned into one of the very first commercial ventures one of my first commercial ventures into commercial diving. And as a career path, I tend to choose the most challenging way you can go, and I tend to forge a path for other people to follow me, because at the time I started doing what I was doing, I'm actually trained as a lawyer, would you believe? When I was doing,
I'm not sure if I remember that.
No, well, I'm actually trained as a lawyer through an external course through the Barristers Bar Board course in Queensland, and worked in a number of different law firms. And when I started doing what I was doing, the Queensland division of OH&S decided that they were going to try and make an example out of me, and try and stop me from doing what I was doing. What they didn't realise was that they'd taken a bit of a chunk of a bite out of something that was a bit bigger than they probably wanted to chew on. And I remember one fellow sitting in front of me, one OH&S officer, and I'll never forget this.
And we probably should mention, sorry, just before you follow on, OHS for around the world is Occupational Health and Safety. So
WHS here in the US.
WHS, yeah. So it's the government agency that protects workplace health and safety of employees. So fairly big sticks that these guys carry.
Oh yeah,
very big sticks. And this one officer was sat in front of me, and he was threatening me with all sorts of enormous fines and possible jail time. And he was getting extremely frustrated. And I looked at him and I said, listen, mate, stop being stupid. You can't do this. It's not in the rules. We're working through the existing legislation, and you've got no way to do this. And he looks at me and he goes, don't you call me stupid. I've got a measured IQ of 137. From that point on, I refused to call him by name and called him Mr. 137.
And it sounds like you won that battle.
Yes, in fact, I won it too convincingly. What actually ended up happening was the Occupational Health and Safety Queensland asked for submission papers with regards to writing new rules around the type of work that I was doing. So they went out publicly. And I wrote a very large submission back into them. And when they released it back to the public, I picked it up and it was almost word for word what I'd written for them, and I'd actually expected that they would tighten down on it, because I'd written it very open, expecting that they'd clamp down on it quite hard, and it ended up leading to a fatality and a young guy who got himself quite badly injured. He ended up being a paraplegic, I think, or quadriplegic. He was quite badly injured. And at the time, I couldn't believe that the government had allowed that to go through. And so then I actually had to lobby them the other way to get them to tighten up on it and say, look, you guys took what I wrote word for word, basically. You changed some of the language just around who the language belonged to. But it's basically word for word. And I ended up lobbying them back the other way. And interestingly, out of that, the commercial diving industry heard about me, and they paid for me to do my commercial diving course. I never actually paid for it, but I actually had the entire industry got together and said, "Yeah, look, Darren, we'd really like you on our side, rather than being in the come back from the dark side, Darren.
Stop being a lawyer."
The government side, yeah.
That's it, and they paid for me to do my course, which was about $12,000, which was in the early 2000s was quite a bit of money.
What is a commercial diver allowed to do that a recreational diver can't?
So that allowed me to undertake structural integrity inspections, and I say that because that's going to lead into a lot about what we're going to talk about later on. Salvage, so I was allowed to do very large salvage from deep water, and it allowed me to basically undertake paid work whereby we were working underwater with the big hard hats on and those types of things.
Okay.
It was interesting because the month I was due to go to do my course, there was two major things that happened. The first one was we bought the company bought its first boat out of WA, and the second thing that happened was in the week that I was supposed to leave, we had a storm here that wrecked 130 boats. It foundered 130 boats in our area. Some of them were gone. They could never be seen again.
Wow.
So I actually spent the 10 days before I got on an aeroplane to go and pick up the boat and then fly back to South Australia to do my course. I actually spent the 10 days salvaging boats off the beaches and raising them up out of shallow water because they all got blown ashore, obviously, during the storm. So I spent that 10 days. By the time I actually got to WA, I was absolutely buggered. I was so tired, it wasn't funny. I was working 23 hours around the clock to beat the tides. So I was working 23 hours and getting an hour off every day. I was catching an hour's sleep, and I worked straight for 10 days.
Presumably you didn't have a lot of staff to call upon at that stage. You know, the requirement to get a commercial license is quite high, it's hard, it's expensive.
Yep.
Airlie Beach isn't that big a place. So it's not like you just sort of turn up and find 10 divers to suddenly go out and start salvaging 150 boats.
No, that's right. Yeah, I think we had 4 guys that were working for us, and I think 3 of them were digging sand. Because, as I say, a lot of the boats were actually on the beach, so we actually had to dig sand for sort of 8 hours a day to make moats around these boats so that we could float them at a high tide and then get them out. So yeah, it was, and that sort of led me into our company in a couple of years. We went from I think we were making $50,000 a year when we first started. In the second year, we made $150,000, and in the third year, we cracked our first $1 million.
Wow!
And so it was a big moves. You know, we were making really big gains, steep gains in the industry.
Yeah.
And we reached a ceiling of $2 million a year turnover. And I realized that for us to be able to expand further than what we were, we needed a really dynamic edge to go up against our bigger competitors, because our bigger competitors had suddenly gone, holy hell, this little company came out of nowhere and it suddenly removed $2 million out of our revenue stream. You know, where did these guys come from? They didn't exist, 2 years ago. And so they suddenly became really aggressive. I realized that there was an end point coming to a lot of the big marine projects that were underway in Australia. And that when that end point came, there was going to be an enormous amount of competition in the marketplace for the contracts that we'd been winning. And so I needed this.
Those projects were wharves, they were ships. Just describe
big
those
wharves, big
yeah.
ports. So we were working on really big bulk material handling type wharves. So these are jetties that are 4 kilometres long, or in miles we're talking just over two miles,
Yep.
3 miles,
almost 3.
Yeah. So that's the actual jetty itself that goes out from the shore is that far going offshore, and then the jetty itself is probably 2 kilometres from end to end. So the wharf itself, where the ships pull up against, they are 2 kilometres from end to end. So we're talking about really big structures, and some of them had been there since the 1970s. And we'd found really big structural problems with them that had been boiling away in the background for 20 years probably, and it led to two of the companies that owned these big wharves to have to spend in excess of tens of millions of dollars. In one particular case, we actually shut down a berth for 20 days, and that was a lost productivity of $1 million a day. They then had to undertake the repair work in the structural failure that we'd found, and that probably cost them in excess of another $1.5 million. And in the other one, they actually had to it was lucky that they just finished a design process for an expansion on that particular port, when they realized that they were actually going to have to destroy part of the port that they were thinking that they could keep there, and they had to build a whole new piece just to go in there. And there had been structural integrity inspection companies in there for 20 years. They'd been in there every year looking at these things, and they'd just never seen it. And when we found it, the reason we found it was because when I sent my divers in there, and I didn't realize this until somebody actually said to me, one of my divers actually said to me, he said, nobody's ever said that to us before. And what I said was, I said, look, these companies are actually paying us to find a problem. They're not paying us to come back and give them a green light and say there is no problem with your structure. They actually want us to go in there and find a problem, because it does two things. One, it validates their job, because as a structural engineer, if they find a problem, they've validated their job. I said, but two, it also validates their trust in us, because if we've found something there, then that's, we're obviously doing our job very well. And we found a number of them, but those are the two standout ones that caused a huge shutdown. And out of that, by this time I wasn't diving very often, and out of that time I was sitting in the office and talking a lot to the engineers, and spending a lot of time talking to construction engineers, design engineers, and structural engineers about what was happening in their structures, how they could safely remove those structures. And I suddenly realized that there was this enormous disconnect between the amount of data that I could physically get for them, and not just me, but anybody who was doing the job, and the amount of data that these guys actually needed to be able to make these decisions. And so I thought, well, this is silly. There must be another way for us to do this. There must be in the oil and gas industry, who are miles ahead of what we do. like space for us, space exploration for the diving industry is what we think of as oil and gas. And I thought there must be a different way. So I jumped on an aeroplane and flew all over the world to big oil and gas conferences and tried to find a different way to undertake these inspections, only to be told at every conference that I went to that we were actually using the state-of-the-art inspection tools.
But that still was
I just couldn't.
Diving down, it was getting underwater, looking in dark crevices full of metal, out of sight, out of mind, rubbish, barnacles, all that sort of stuff. It's not a clean warehouse that you're playing in, and depending on the level you're going to, you're breathing different mixtures. You've got hard helmets or soft wetties, all sorts of very constraining clothing.
Yep, and in a lot of cases, when you're working, say, at the bottom of a port, you're actually working by feel. It is completely black. I mean, it's so black that you're seeing stars in front of your face. And I remember it being so black that the little LED readout that they had on the thickness testers, we would actually stick it up against the helmet so that we could see it, because you couldn't, if you held it away, you couldn't see it at all. It was that black. So you'd be using the little pointer and putting the piezo up against the steel, and then you'd have the rest of it up against your helmet, so you could sort of see this LED light, and you could see this green LED light. And you go, okay, and you'd call the numbers up to the surface.
How deep were you when you were doing these readings?
Those ones are depending on the tide, because the tide in the areas that we work in were 6 meters, anything up to 6 meters. So that's an 18 feet difference. No, sorry, we were in anywhere between 20 meters and 14 meters, depending on the tide.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just for it to be so dark. Yeah.
It's dark because of the environment that you're in. It's very silty, gets stirred up a lot by the big props that come through.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
Big tidal,
quality of the water.
Big tidal effects.
Yeah.
It's just a very black, dark environment. The places that are dark because there's no sunlight, the water's actually very clear. And so you would be able to, the light that you would get from the LED at those sort of depths are like, oh yeah, it's no problems, I'll hold it at arm's length and I can read it. But in the ports, it's a completely different kettle of fish. And I had made this, realized that there was nothing else on the marketplace, and we had a potential contract coming up, which was worth about $40 million. And even though I had worked with the company, with the asset owner, to develop the methodology and to develop the work plan, I knew that this at $40 million, they're going to go out to tender. They're not just going to give it to me. And to be able to do that, to be able to compete for that, I actually needed something. And I sat down and I thought about it, and I thought, well, look, I can go out and compete on price, but everybody's going to compete on price, and therefore it's going to be a race to the bottom. Or I can compete on delivering service delivery, but everybody's delivering the same service. It's the same thing. So there's not a lot else that I can deliver. And then I thought, but the one thing that I can deliver, and I might be able to deliver, is something new in the technology field. And on a flight back from London, I couldn't sleep, and I was sitting there and I was thinking about all of this technology that I'd seen available in the oil and gas industry. And I came up with a way to put it all on a single platform, which would climb up and down piles and utilize a combination of 3 or 4 different sensors to be able to give me a single reading output. and give us 98% of the data that was resident in these piles. And we were actually, by manually inspecting the piles, we were collecting 0.012%. When we work out the available data, we were actually collecting 0.012% of the data manually. And I actually worked out that we could do this with a robot, and get 98%. But again, came back to Australia and said, well, okay, now I need to build a robot. So let's go and find somebody in Australia to build me a robot. And of course, in 2013, there was just nobody around. Australia was like looking at your head and scratching their heads going, right, what, you mean a robot? You want a vacuum, like a robo vacuum type thing? Is that, how are you going to get that to inspect a pile, Darren? And I'm like, no. And so I ended up taking some advice from a business colleague of mine who was one of the highest certified mariners in his field in Australia, and he actually passes the top naval cartographers through, so that they have to pass his test before they're allowed to do anything. He said, look, he went away and talked to some people inside of CSIRO, the Australian Science Division. And they said, they came back and they said, look, there's probably two places in the world you want to be. One's out near Toronto in Vancouver. They've got some pretty interesting stuff going on there. And the other one's Seattle. So I went to both locations and spent a while there. Came away thinking, well, look, Seattle's got Boeing. Seattle's got all of the specialist people that I need in that area. Toronto, although it's got some really cool research divisions and some really good smaller stuff going on there. Having Boeing just meant the supply chain just got cleaned up almost immediately. Yeah. So I went back to Seattle and set up a bunch of people over there to start building the first robot for us. We got in two robotics engineers. One of them was three robotics engineers. So one main engineer, senior engineer, and two young guys are just out of university, an electrical engineer, and a guy who did all of the manufacturing of all the structure itself.
So this is the piece of equipment that's got to go underwater in dark places, operate autonomously. It can't necessarily be controlled by somebody upstairs. So it's got waterproof, it's got pressure, it's got light issues. You want to put a range of sensors, and this thing has to work its way up and down pylons and along the bottoms of boats and presumably along the sea floor, recording information, storing it, transporting it back, and have a big battery in the middle of it to make sure it keeps going for a number of hours.
So our first one, what we did is we built it so it could just go up and down the pile. So it was just able to climb up and down the lateral pile. But what we wanted it to be able to do is to expand and contract, so it could take on different size piles, because every port has different size piles. And so we actually designed it so it could expand and contract and climb up the piles. And if the pile got bigger or smaller, which they do at some point, it was able to adapt to that. And we knew that we weren't going to be able to put batteries on it in 2013. So in 2013, just the weight of the batteries and the extra weight and then the extra power that you needed, you have an escalating problem. And when you start drawing that out on a map, you start to go, okay, this is turning into a behemoth now. We need to probably dial it back and go back to an umbilical. And so we created it with an umbilical. And what I really wanted to do was to remove a lot of the danger and the repetitive nature of the work that the divers were undertaking, because it was really dangerous work for them. It was horribly tedious and repetitive. It was the job they hate the most. You ask a diver what he wants to do, he'll say, I want to burn stuff, or I want to explode stuff, you know, I want to do something that's really, you know, macho and cool. And you say, well, no, you're going to go around and get me 100 different measurement points. And they go, really? That's what I'm going to do? The moment you put an ultrathermic lance in their hands, you see their eyes light up and they get a big smile and they get all excited. Or even just put a wrench in their hand. It's amazing how much fun they seem to have underwater with a wrench. Yeah, I got a wrench. It was what we needed this to be able to.
You're giving the team can go and do more fun stuff. They don't need to do the boring stuff. So they're going to remain more motivated. And you're collecting more data points and you're providing a higher level of assurance to your customers. Presumably at the same price, maybe even cheaper, because it's you know, divers, I'm sure, are not lowly paid people.
No, that's exactly right. And again, I didn't realize at the time, like, as I said, I seem to pick these career pathways where I'm forging ahead for other people. I didn't realize at the time that what I was creating for me to be able to get these contracts was actually something that was groundbreaking globally. It was a new way of thinking about inspecting these structures. It was a new way of thinking about inspecting structures across the board. People weren't looking in this direction at all. And you know, it turns out that we were some 7 years ahead of our time. And I've got to tell you that I always thought that if you were 7 years ahead of your time, man, you just had it on easy street. You were going to make billions of dollars. Yeah, if you had a blue ocean to go work in and you had this great idea, people would just be flocking with you with money and throwing it at you.
And so you built the project, you built the robot, and where's the millions of investment money that you raised?
Well, that's it. When you're on the cutting edge of things, or as we were and still are in many places, on the bleeding edge, especially in Australia, it's very difficult to raise capital, and we ran into it's terrible, and we ran into several big problems along the way. So in 2015, we had the oil crisis, and we actually had an investment of $10 million US, pretty much ready to go, from a company called Underwater Integrity Services, and they were a company that spun out of a really big oil and gas VC called High-Tech Ventures, and in March 2015, they announced that UIS had been formed by High-Tech Vision rather, and we started talking to them. They actually rang me up. I was in Seattle, and I get this phone call, and it's this Italian guy on the other end of the line, and he says, we heard you're doing some really interesting stuff up there in Seattle. And he rang me on my Australian telephone. And I said to him, well, I've got a couple of questions here. I said, one, we're in super secret mode. Nobody's supposed to know that I'm even here doing this. So how did you find out what we're doing? I said, and second, how the hell did you get my telephone number? And how did you know I was in Seattle right now? And he said, oh, well, look, you know, we've got people who report back to us about this sort of stuff. And so it just goes to show you that you can't keep a secret in industry. You can try, You know, I mean, an Australian company who's in super secret mode, working with a very small group of people in Seattle. If we can't keep a secret, nobody can.
So how do you protect that then, Darren? So what were some of the strategies you put in place?
Well, very quickly, we started the process of putting a patent in place, and we had. It was one of those things where the patent attorney sort of looked at it and went, "Yep, no, we can do this," and every other person who looked at it afterwards said, "There's no way you will get a patent for that. There's too much previous art in there." And I said, "No, I'm pretty sure that we can." I said, "I've done a look, and I think we can."
Legal training starts to kick in.
Yeah, I was going to say, there's the lawyer.
Exactly, that's the lawyer kicking in. And we've just been handed those patents. So the American patents just come through. They should be sending us the paperwork any day now.
Oh,
wow!
Fantastic news! Yeah.
Yeah.
It's because it's been a long haul.
Man, it's been huge, and it's still going on. I mean, we're still trying to raise capital here in Australia. And
now you and I were attending a conference in Brisbane, I remember, and a dirty great storm, we call a cyclone, hit your house, didn't it?
That's it. So that was the other huge, great big setbacks that we had. We'd suffered several cyclones, probably a major cyclone every 3 years. And then in 2017, you're right, we were at Myriad, I think it was. And Cyclone Debbie, Category 5 cyclone, or Category 5 hurricane, if you like, hit, basically it ran straight over the top of my house. We'd actually brought a whole bunch of the roboticists over from the US to come work in Australia, and it was their first summer in Australia. They didn't last past Cyclone Debbie. One of the young fellas stayed with us, but the others, they all went, "No, Darren, if this is what it's like, we're leaving." And in a way, I can't blame them. I mean, I think
it's a dangerous Australian place.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, think New Orleans, where they had flooding and were without power and water and everything for.
Well, again, right now.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Hurricane Laura's just crossed the coast last night between New Orleans and Houston. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. And so the boys had the cyclone itself wasn't actually supposed to cross at us. It was supposed to cross, I think, about 500 kilometers north of where we are, or 200 odd mile north of where we are. And so the boys had left the robot in its factory state, which was, you know, with covers off it and everything, when they went home on Friday night. And then by Saturday, things had deteriorated so badly that they were ringing me, asking me what they should do, and I was in Brisbane. Excuse me. And I said to them, "Look, you need to make yourself safe. The cyclone's coming your way. Don't go back to the factory. Batten down where you are. We don't know how quickly it's going to hit, and my main concern is for you guys." And that cyclone ripped through our area, tore the roof off our factory, tore the front door off. We had a big roller door, tore the roller door completely off the front of the factory, and obviously all of the watertight compartments were open to the elements, and the robot just got absolutely drenched. And
electronics just flooded.
Yep, all the electronics were gone. The whole thing was needed to be basically pulled apart and.
So how long did it take you to sort of set yourself right from that? Because I mean, that was just your next setback. But how long did it take you to get back up and running again?
We're still recovering from that 3 years later. So it took us. I think it took us 8 months to get a modicum of money for the insurance on the robot. And we decided that rather than fixing the which in hindsight was a mistake, rather than fixing the current robot, what we did is we went out and designed version 2, because the robot that we had was designed in 2013. And it was designed around concepts and available materials and things that were available at 2013. And by the time we'd got to 2017, there was a lot of changes. And to give you an idea, our version weighs about 650 kilos. Version 2 weighs 110. So it's a huge diet. Enormous diet for it. But what we decided to do was to spend the money on designing version 2, and we were again reasonably assured by people around us that, look, no, Darren, you're going to have no problems raising capital for this. We went through a number of different capital raising or firms who said that they could raise capital for us, and again I made a lot of mistakes there. Learned a lot of lessons about.
You were going around
capital.
the world a few times, weren't you? I remember you were bouncing between Brazil and Japan and Hawaii, and it was going everywhere.
Yeah, went to China, went to the UAE twice. Back to the US a number of times, and we were utilizing the services of different people to try and raise that capital. And looking back today, it's the big mistake that I made was, one, I agreed to pay people up front for services that they ended up not delivering, and two, I didn't understand networking the way I do now. And whether that's because there are far greater options available now with networking, or whether it was just my my ignorance in the way in which you can network. So a lot of those people who we worked with over that time, I learnt a lot about networking from them, and I learnt how to make those connections with people, and how to connect really personally with people so that they took an interest in what we were doing. And that was that's been one of my largest learning curves with regards to trying to raise capital. Making robots, designing robots, and when we get the capital, dragging it through to manufacture and commercialization and expansion around the world, that's easy compared to raising capital. Man, raising capital for manufacturing a robot is just unbelievable. Yeah. And again, we were on the cutting edge, because when I designed our first piece of robotics, I said to everybody who we were dealing with, they said, "Oh, how are you going to make money out of it? We've got to sell the robot." And I'm like, no. We sell the service of the robot, because we can make like 100 times the money out of the service of the robot. Why would we sell the robot? You don't sell the robot, we sell the service. And of course, over the years, we actually built our very first business model was around selling the service of this robot. And then 3 years ago, this a business model, which has now become known as Robotics as a Service, started to enter the US vernacular, and it really started to gain pace last year. And I'm sitting there again, last year, as Robotics as a Service is really starting to gain pace, and I'm going, what's going on here? How come I'm on the leading edge of all this stuff and nobody listens to me at the time? It's like, it's so frustrating.
So has it been an advantage or not being in Australia, let alone Airlie Beach? Because Australia's a great place. We've all hailed from there. But again, in hindsight, would you have relocated yourself full time with the family and everything to Seattle, for instance, to continue this?
Yeah. That's definitely what we should have done. I should have moved, instead of moving the robot and the facility out of the US. We should have basically stayed. I should have actually committed to the US full time. But again, I was very wary of how to network into places like Silicon Valley and how to network into Boston and Massachusetts and the real hotspots for robotics. You know, I mean, I again was probably a little bit naive with regards to how cutting edge we were at the time. It's only until in hindsight you sort of sit back and go, well, you know, it took 4 years for anybody to even come close to what we were doing, and even now they're badly replicating some of the parts of what we're doing. And we're now, I think one of the great, while I'm sitting here saying about how there's all these missed opportunities there, I've got to say that even though there was so many missed opportunities along the way, one of the things that has happened is that because I've been working on a really thin budget, I've been working with trying to create a real dynamic around the robotics industry in Australia and to get things happening here. What it meant was that I needed to keep searching, and I think that if I wasn't hungry, I wouldn't have kept searching. I would have probably just done what I was kept feeding from the same thing that I was going to feed from.
Yep.
And now we've got such a huge range of IP that covers everything from not just marine infrastructure, but civil infrastructure, residential infrastructure, roads and bridges and overpasses, and we can see so many different things in a lot of these different structures, that while the rest of the world has been catching up with us in the marine department, we've actually been forging ahead with all of these other sorts of areas and still staying on that, still staying on that bleeding edge. Sorry, Johnny. Yeah.
Oh, no, that's fine. No, that's amazing. Just how now you can see some diversification opportunities. One of the things we are going to have to do is, I mean, I feel like, Mark, like everything Darren's talked about, we could probably just do a year's worth of podcasts, you know, and maybe we should do stories with Darren.
Break down every element, the myriad of sort of things you got to do as a startup, all in a couple of years. It's a big job.
Yeah,
even if you have experience.
And I think one of the things I would add to what you talked about today, Darren, and I've only known you for about 3 or 6 months now, is just your willingness to share the story, you know, and just to talk through all the things and to weigh it all up and say, this is what we did right, this is what we did wrong, and it's what I should have done. And I love that. I think that's something that's certainly something our community needs. And you know that. You've been very active in our community as a mentor and as a friend. But you know, I think it's just something that the community in general needs. And so I've really enjoyed this story. I've stayed very quiet. Halfway through, I had a cat rubbing around my legs and howling. I think you could hear the Australian accents. It's our Australian cat. So, but yeah, look, it's been a beautiful conversation. Any parting thoughts, Darren? Any pearls of wisdom? We are pretty much out of time, but I would love to hear anything else you would like to add to what you've already said.
Look, I agree completely. What you've just said is talk about your ideas with people. Don't be afraid to share them, because everybody has something that they can give to you, and the piece of wisdom that they can give to you, whether you use it or not. You know, it's there, and if you've got a great idea, it doesn't matter how many people, and actually Mark's heard me say this to a room full of people when we were judging a startup weekend.
Yep.
it doesn't. I said to the room full of people, I said, it doesn't matter whether you actually won this competition or you didn't get a mention at all, because some of the best startups are the ones that people have said had no hope whatsoever.
Right.
Because it has to do with the passion, your passion, to actually get out there and do it. Just having a good idea, that's nowhere near enough. You actually have to have the passion, the drive, and the willingness to put in the hard yards and go that extra mile to make that a success. And that's what being a startup is. Everything else, you're going to learn that along the way. But those bits of things you really have to take with you, and you have to be willing to put that on the line.
Real mental journey.
It is
like a lot of success. It's all about what's going on up here, right? And it's all about that stamina. And so
it's a marathon.
Look,
it's not a sprint.
Yeah,
exactly.
Oh, sorry, keep going.
I was going to say the proof in how stressful this is that 7 years ago I had no grey in my beard. It was black.
I thought you were just.
This is all just from entrepreneuring. It's that's all it
Colonel
is.
Sanders, you know.
Exactly.
That's all right. A bit of grey allows us to look our age.
Well, we've got to. I mean, I don't have
Exactly.
any up here, so I've got to have some here so you can tell I'm smart. You know. So, yeah. I've got some wisdom here somewhere. But that's beautiful, Darren. Thank you so much for your time today. I know it's getting late over there in Australia. Mark, it's always fun to do these, and you know, we've now got a whole pile of these interviews.
We go back 5 years when we started these.
Now we've got the ones going way back as well, yeah. But these more recent ones where we've been doing them weekly, these fireside chats. But Darren, it was fantastic to have you on board. We are just going to go ahead and end the Facebook live stream, but obviously stay on the line. So thank you all for being here today. It's been wonderful. I'm John O'Brake, Mark Phillips. We've been with Darren Foster. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Darren. We'll look forward to catching up with you soon, mate.
Thanks.